Joe Scarborough, he has gone a little bit viral for a rant he did this morning. And he was talking about those disgusting text messages that came out from the young Republicans,
Mm.
ages ranging up to 35 years old. That ain't
Mm-hmm.
that young, right?
It showed the fuck ain't.
Right. And Joe Scarborough, who used to be a Republican, he's now on MSNBC show called Morning Joe. I used to like when Joe Madison would say the real Morning Joe, the late great Joe Madison.
I
Used
love
to love
that.
that.
Yes.
I love we miss him so much, Joe
Mm-hmm.
Madison. So he was talking about these young Republicans, and I guess he was kind of mortified that they would even use language like this. It was anti-black, anti-Semitic, just disgusting messages. And I want you to hear what Joe Scarborough said about racism in America and his experience. It's a little bit long, but I think it's important to listen to this. I think this speaks to a lot of where we are in the country for a very long time. Listen to this.
Some in their 20s and 30s, praising Nazism. Or in this case, this guy saying he has a Nazi streak and saying horribly racist things. And I just want to say, Jim said we don't live in a racist nation. I can only speak to my experience. I've lived in Georgia growing up. I lived in Alabama. I lived in Mississippi. I lived in Northwest Florida, which is the Deep South. I have lived the majority of my life in the Deep South. And I will tell you, through elementary school, middle school, high school, college, perhaps somewhere else in the darkness on the edge of town, there were racists and bigots talking this way. I never once, well, actually I did one time. I heard it one time. One time. But other than this one time, I never heard this sort of talk. I never heard, and I grew up not in a bubble. We lived in a very middle-class family with Southern Baptist churches. I never once heard this kind of talk growing up. This is not normal. Maybe it's been normalized over the past few years, but this is not normal. And I grew up in the deep, deep South. We live in a new South. We live in a new nation. And that was the message that I received in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Northwest Florida, whether I was in class, whether I was playing baseball, whether I was in the locker room playing football. You just didn't do it. And now for our leaders to be nodding and winking, say, oh, kids will be kids. No, kids won't be kids. Not in this realm. We teach our children better than that.
So let me say this. Joe Scarborough is not in the bubble. He is the bubble. I want to be really, really clear about that. It reminded me of Toni Morrison talking about the fishbowl to explain whiteness. This is the late, great Toni Morrison talking about the fish swims around, seeing the castle, the pebbles, the plants, all that good stuff, but never the water, because the fish doesn't realize the bowl itself shapes its world. This is not me. This is Toni Morrison saying it. She was saying that's how whiteness works. You grow up inside racism and never feel it, never notice it, because it is literally the water swimming around you. And the fish is not aware of the water.
Yeah.
So he says he grew up in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Northwest Florida, and never heard this kind of racist talk, except once. He brought up the story, but I had to take that part out. And I just want to say that's not proof that racism didn't exist. That's proof that it didn't have to announce itself to you, Mr. Scarborough. That's what it is. I'm 14 years younger than Joe Scarborough. I wasn't raised in the Jim Crow South. I was raised in Washington State and Philadelphia, more time in Philadelphia. In Washington State, I've told this story before. I was in a predominantly white area, experienced hatred and bigotry from teachers, from kids in my classroom. This might be hard for folks to understand, but racism does not evaporate with just good manners. It doesn't. This is not anything new. This is not the new South or the old Pacific Northwest. I've always said this. This is taught in the home, solidified in the schools, and cemented in media. So when he says he never saw it, that doesn't make him enlightened.
Right.
It just shows that he is in that fishbowl, and it makes him exhibit A in Toni Morrison's metaphor, the fish who can't see the water. So how great it is that you never saw it. And because in your middle class bubble, you say, oh, well, because it makes folks feel better to think that what we saw in those messages is something new or unique, when it's not. Those white men learned that from somebody. And I'll give you another example. The same thing when it comes to anti-gay sentiments. Folks are thinking, oh, it's over. I don't see it anymore. All these kids are living great lives. They're LGBT. They're they, them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once you live outside, if you are a gay person, you know it's still hell. You know kids are still being bullied in school. You know what it means to walk down the street and be afraid to hold your partner's hand. You know it's not as safe as some straight folks think it might be. Just like if you are a black person in America, you know it's not as safe as some white folks might think it is. I'm not saying there's been no progress, not at all. But Joe Scarborough is 62 years old. And according to him, we were post-racial when he was a kid in Florida and Mississippi. Now, you weren't. You might have been in your bubble because you were in that illusionary world. So I was really kind of like, and I realized that this is really hard. This is like trigonometry. This is really hard for people to understand. They think it's about being a victim. I'm not a victim. I'm very happy with who I am and where I came from. But it's a reality. And when you deny the reality, you actually, with that kind of platform that you have, Mr. Scarborough, you actually take us back. I'm glad that we saw those text messages.
Right.
It's great to know what somebody's really thinking. I love it. I want to see more of it. Now, when you say, oh my God, good God Almighty, osh gosh bagosh, oh me, oh my, I can't believe this is still out there. And you have that platform. You have that platform and you can't believe this?
Right.
That's the problem. And you know what, Reese? They were saying this decades ago. They were saying this in the 1960s. You had quote unquote conservatives saying, a civil rights act, we don't need it. Slavery is over. There's a couple incidents here or there, but black men aren't being lynched every day. Kind of like how they say black men aren't being killed by a police officer. This is over. They were saying in the 70s, in the 80s. Every era they've all said, we've moved beyond this.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying there's been no progress, but I know for sure, as someone who's younger than Joe Scarborough, you were in an illusionary world, and you were in that fishbowl Toni Morrison talked about. Go ahead, Reese Colbert.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, it sounded like he said that there was racism, but they didn't talk like this. Did I hear that right? Or he said there wasn't racism and they didn't talk like this? I thought he said,
not that he said there wasn't, but he said that this kind of behavior, he never saw this.
Right.
This was the new South when he was growing up. That this was the new South. They didn't talk like this. Except for one incident.
Yeah, and that's what. And see,
that absolute.
But here's the thing. That's why I don't really trust a lot of white people on detecting and calling a thing, because their threshold for what racism sounds like is like Nazi N-word. Like
N-word, exactly.
that's how blatant it has to be.
Right.
For them to even acknowledge that racism is involved. And then they do what Joe Scarborough does, is gaslight and try to make it seem like it's an abomination. Racism shows up in every single American institution and every statistic when you compare outcomes or treatment of Black people compared to treatment of white people and other races. That's where racism shows up. Racism is a practice, not a text message, not a speech, not a word. And see, what people like Joe Scarborough want to believe is that racism is an interpersonal interaction. And, well, I don't know white people who are mean to Black people because they're Black. So that means that there's no racism. That ain't what racism means. No. There are a lot of people who can be very civil in an interpersonal interaction with Black people. Absolutely. And have animus towards Black people and have racial animus towards Black people. But in the interaction, individual to individual, they can temporarily see a person in front of them that allows them to say, hey, how you doing? Good day. May I take your order? Or whatever the fuck transaction is happening where two people come together. But racism is what happens when a Black woman goes to the fucking hospital and she dies having a baby 3 times more often than a white woman does. Or the fact that Black people and white people use marijuana at the same rates, and yet Black people are arrested for it, whatever, exponentially more often. Or that we have higher, the fact that we speed equal amounts, but we're pulled over more often. That's what racism is. I don't care about how white people feel about Black people. I don't even too much care about how white people talk about Black people. What I care about is the weaponizing of their feelings to fuck us over, to keep us out of economic advancement, to keep us from voting, to keep us from surviving, going into the hospital, whether it's with fucking high blood pressure, whether it's having a baby, whether it's having a migraine. That's what I care about. So all of this talk about decorum, about, well, that's not how we talking. That's not what I've never seen people talk like that. It don't matter how people talk. It's how they act in practice with the position of power that is vested in them, more likely because they're white. The Ingracia guy who talked about, what did he say? He has a Nazi streak. He was going to be in a position to lead a whistleblower agency. You had people in this so-called young is really doing a lot of work there to try to make it sound like these people are young. They're not youth. It's not Black youth. I mean, it wasn't Republican youth. These are people who are under 50, basically. Okay. So these are people who have who are in elected office, people who are serving in the Trump administration. So I don't care that they feel this way. I care that they're in a position to do something about it. And I care that they are foot soldiers of policy that has cost 300,000 Black women our jobs, that has caused Black unemployment to skyrocket back to basically where it was during the pandemic, that is causing, SNAP benefits are going to expire, that is causing millions of people are going to lose their health insurance. Millions of people are going to be kicked out of their homes. The government is shut down. That's what I actually care about. So the reason why people like Joe Scarborough say stupid ass shit like that is because as long as people aren't saying things in front of them, then they think it doesn't impact anybody. They think that it doesn't exist, when every single metric in our society is proof that it exists. But they think that it's proof of our inherent criminality, of our inferiority, of, oh, we're not as intelligent as them, we're not as X, Y, and Z as them. No, every single thing that you see where there's a disparity is proof of that racism that Joe Scarborough does not want to acknowledge exists.
And I think the most annoying thing about Trumpism is that people think this is something new with Trumpism. And
Yeah.
I've been saying this for years. Trump is the hate that Republicans created.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop. I've been saying it for a long time. But I think in some bizarre, sick way, Trumpism makes people feel good about themselves because they're like, well, I'm not that. I don't know anybody in my family who questioned if Barack Obama was born in this country. Oh my gosh, I would never say Haitian immigrants are eating cats and dogs. Outside of yelling the N-word publicly,
Mm-hmm.
For some people, Trump's racism is pretty extreme and pretty evident. And it's
Yeah.
obvious. But it isn't always obvious.
So I just feel like people need to really understand that. And to me, to make it seem like these text messages are not indicative of the policy of the systems in our country, of this administration, of the Republican Party. The reason why this is not getting the kind of condemnation that they would have had to at least pretend to give prior to Trump, it's because they don't actually have a problem with it.
They don't. And they're worried that it might hurt their voting base to call it out.
And that's the other thing. Trump is in office. I've said this so many times, and I'm going to say it one more time. He is in office because of text messages like that, because people want a permission slip to say shit like that and feel that way and get a job working for the United States of America, working for the president of the United States. They want that permission slip. They want that power.